Hello lovelies, welcome to, I guess, episode 1 of your questions answered. I have prepared screenshots of your questions, which I have airdropped to my iPad, and I've got that here. I'm going to dive straight in. This is Erin Lee Ross. Hi Sonas, I have a houseboat and want to switch out the traditional drapes with hooks for Roman blinds or something similar. I have the fabric and liner, but no pattern. With the lockdown and living in a small town in the middle of Canada, sounds amazing, I can't get a pattern. Don't worry, it's not always about the pattern. Any videos available for that? I have a lovely cream and navy cottage stripe with a separate liner, thanks. So, Erin Lee Ross. So if you're in a houseboat, then the ceilings are quite low, aren't they? So switching out your traditional drapes for Roman blinds sounds like it might actually give you a bit more space, or it might look a bit more spacious. What pops into my mind, and one of the things for you to bear in mind, is that when you draw up your Roman blinds, you don't want that pull-up drop, that we call it, to be too deep. Otherwise it's going to hide quite a lot of the top of your window and you're going to lose quite a lot of light. So you will be able to probably find online somewhere where you can make your pleats really, really small. And that will be helpful in terms of creating a Roman blind that draws up really tight to the ceiling. So it would look nice, but also be practical and functional in your houseboat. I think that you have a lovely cream and navy cottage stripe. Fabulous. Bit nautical, but not too boaty. And that could work. And you're saying that you could make it with a separate liner. Absolutely. Or not. You don't have to make it with a separate liner if you don't want to, depending on what look you're going for. If you want to shut more light out when the blind is down, then definitely put a liner on it. But if it's more for aesthetics, sometimes it's really nice if they're sheer Roman blinds. Or you had actually messaged me again and said about a cafe voile, which you can either have a metal rod with the metal hooks on it, or you can literally have a bit of wire and make a pocket at the top of your voile and put the wire through. Equally as cute, I think. And also, if you are going to go cafe voile, for example, let's face it, you could do Roman blind and cafe voile so that you've got the prettiness of the blue and white stripe, but still you've got the privacy of the cafe voile. If you do the cafe voile, what I think looks quite nice sometimes is where the pocket is, if you make sure there's a little bit of a fringe on top of that and give a little bit extra fullness in your voile, then you've got quite a pretty top to it. And it might just soften that line slightly, depending on your style, obviously. I'd love to see a photo of that once it's done. Feel free to email me, welcome@sonaz.com. 𝔸𝕠𝕒𝕝 1804. Oh hey, question from a hobbyist. What is the best staple size and PSI minimum for air compressor when upholstering in tight corners of a chair? Have been wanting to get a stapler and compressor for years, and after seeing you on the repair shop, I've finally been inspired to bite the bullet and get them. Most upholstery videos are from men, and it's so nice to see it from a woman's perspective. Thank you. I love rewatching every single one of your upholstery episodes for tips I might have missed. Keep up the awesome work. Thank you, 𝔸𝕠𝕝. So, staple size. I could do a whole video on that really. If you are just stapling thin fabric to your piece of furniture, then a 6mm shall suffice. However, if you're using quite thick fabric, or maybe there are folds that you're trying to staple down, then an 8 or 10mm staple might be better. Now, what one has to remember is, should you make a mistake, which does happen, I make mistakes too, the shorter your staple, the easier it is to get out. Now, you're asking here, tight corners, wasn't it? Yes, when upholstering in tight corners of a chair. I don't know if that's a concave shape or not. But if you are stapling into corners, then you're going to have to be careful about what your PSI is anyway. I will double check for you and put it on the screen here what PSI your compressor needs to be at, because from memory I can't remember. And actually I've got a few different staple guns. My long nose staple gun takes a lesser PSI than my standard nose staple gun. I don't know why. It's great to staple with a staple gun. Just remember, only put your finger on the trigger when the nose is on the work. Don't hover your finger over that trigger, and make sure you don't take the safety off of your trigger as well, because it really hurts when it goes through your finger. Crafty Sister 65. I've been thinking about this question quite a lot actually. I have a question about dressing French doors, or a French door that is east facing, where the center panel opens and tilts. Need to dress to reduce glare in summer. What to do, please? Sad emoji face. Crafty Sister. Could be my sister from another mister, couldn't you? North, south, east, west. South facing is, you'll get most sunlight if you're, I'm guessing you're in the UK. East facing, still gonna have those problems, as you've said. Now, French door. So this opens up and tilts. If it's just to reduce glare, what you could find is a really beautiful, thick, sheer or sheer-like fabric. You could dress that anyhow that you'd like. You could have it on a track, for example, or sometimes, I tell you what we've done sometimes is also, or a roller blind. You could actually, say if you find a really nice sheer, and some sheers actually have these beautiful embroidered repeat patterns on them, or floral designs embroidered onto them. You can actually have that stiffened into a roller blind and then maybe a pelmet on top. So that's quite a neat way. Not having seen a picture of your home or the room that it's going in, I'm just going to chuck you a couple of ideas. So you could go for a sheer roller, and then you can control the height, and when it's up, then it's really stored away nice and neatly. You could do them in curtain style on a track or even a pole, depending on what your taste is. If you do it in a curtain style, then it dresses the room a little bit more. And you could, what's coming to my mind is you could have them puddling on the floor a little bit, so it's quite whimsically, and that's quite elegant. Furthermore, what you could do as well, if you like the curtain idea, so like a fabric draping either side, is you could choose a really heavy linen and not have them lined, and again that would give you the same sort of effect and look, and then you're much more open to colour choices and also design choices than if you went for a heavy linen. It doesn't sound like in your question that you are needing to use curtains for privacy or for warmth, so going with something unlined that you can draw during the day when the sun is at its kind of glariest means that you're still going to get some lovely light through. When you do put fabric up to a window during the day, it can glare through, and say if there's an embroidered pattern, sometimes you actually get that kind of, you're still able to see the shadow of the pattern or the body of the pattern. Might not be the colour, but you can still see forms and something that's might be quite pretty. If that doesn't answer your question, then drop us an email and I can see if I can find another solution for you, or send me a photo of your room. The Reaver stitches. I would like to know how to apply fabric to a wall. I saw you did it in a client's house and I really want to try it. I love upholstered walls. There is just something so fabulous about the finish, the look, the atmosphere it creates. I love it. And there are people online who I've seen doing amazing fabric walls actually, and it would be really helpful for you and for all of you if I actually started filming some of this stuff when I'm doing it. Depending if it's on a new build or in an older home, the difference really is the square and straightness of your walls. What you can do, and the simplest way to do it, is to actually create a batten frame on your wall. You could literally glue and pin battens around the top, sides, bottom, Depending on the size of the wall as well, you might want to sort of divide the wall up. And then once you've got your bottom, then you want to staple. This is a staple gun job. Compressed air staple gun is the best way you're going to get a good finish. Staple a layer, a plastic sheeting, and then on top of that, a lining. Some people use a lining, some people use a wadding. I like to use like a curtain interliner. So you could use a thermal or a poly interliner, and you're stapling that over. Make sure it's stretched quite nicely as well. And then again, depending on the width and your fabric, but let's take a standard width fabric for an example. You want to sew your widths together. Let's say your wall drop is 2 meters. It probably won't be, it's an easy number. You want to cut your fabric in 2.3 meter drops, sew them together, and then what I would suggest is you use one corner of your room as the datum, if you like, the straight line, and work across and work out, and get yourself a plumb line, so a bit of string with a weight on the bottom, so that when you get to your seams, your joins in your fabric, you can tap this into the wooden panel that batten that you've got on your wall, and let it hang, so that when you fix the bottom of that seam to your bottom batten, then we know that that seam is absolutely plumb and straight, and visually it's going to look perfect. And work your way around. Work to the corners, and then once you've stapled that all off, trim it down, and then you want a walling braid to go over the top of it to hide those staple marks. Personally, I like to use tiny little baby gimp pins to attach my walling braid to my wall. I don't like to use glue. Definitely don't use a fabric glue, because that can actually bleed into your fabric over time, or quickly, or sort of like as you're doing it. And over time it actually disintegrates and it goes like an orangey colour. If you're going to use any type of glue, use a hot melt glue gun. I hope that's helpful. Maybe what might be helpful for you is try it on one wall first before you attack the whole lot, because you can always butt up against it. Queenie P58. Oh hey, here's a question. I'm planning on replacing the cover of a box cushion with welting. I've never done this before. How much seam allowance should I leave? And is there a way to assure my cover fits the insert snugly? It's not too tight and not too so it's not too tight and not too loose. Thank you so much. My pleasure, Queenie. So in the US, I think you call piping welting. And so if we're talking about piping, then I hope I'm going to give you the right answer. I've never done this before. How much seam allowance should I leave? When you're sewing a normal piece of work, whatever your sewing allowance is for that, it could be 1/2 inch, could be 12 mil, same thing, but depending on what measurements you use. You want to have the same on your piping as well, your welting. Now, the best way to work out how much sewing allowance you're going to be left with once you've sewn your fabric around your piping is by getting a scrap bit of fabric, wrapping it around your piping and on top of itself, and measuring where your sewing allowance line. So let's take 1/2 inch, for example. Let's do millimeters, because I think that's probably globally accepted. 12 mil comes to on the excess, and then mark it. Take the piping out, unroll what you've wrapped over the piping, and then measure what that distance is. And that will be your cut length for your piping fabric that you're going to sew on top of your piping cord. I've never done this before. Don't worry, you can do this. How much seam allowance should I leave, and is there a way to assure my cover fits the insert snugly? So a box cushion is, for those of you who don't know, is a cushion that has a top and a bottom and a border running around it. And what Queenie P58 is doing is actually including piping inside that. I have got a really good way of making sure that my box cushions are absolutely perfect. And basically, we're using millimeters, aren't we? If I have got what would be the millimeters? 100 millimeter thick cushion, foam, that's 4 inches. And I want to make a box cushion for that, I would cut my border so that it finishes at 75mm. So that's an inch smaller, or 25 centimeters smaller than the thickness of the foam. That makes it snug that way. In terms of the width and the depth, or the length and the depth, whichever way you want to say it, if you cut your cover so that it finishes to the measurement that you want, but you oversize your foam by 15mm, depending on what foam you use, then it will fit lovely and snugly, and of course, plumptiously. And one of the things that we do here when we're doing foam into cushions, it's not just about cutting your cover correctly, sewing it correctly, and popping some foam inside the cover. I suggest, and I recommend, and we only do this here, your foam needs to be covered in a wadding, so a 2 ounce, or actually if you really want to be fabulous, go for 4 ounce. And on top of that wadding, I would suggest you also include a stockinette layer, and that stockinette layer goes on top of your wadding, on top of your foam, and it means that the wadding doesn't catch on your cover and on your seams, but also the stockinette allows the cover to move on your wadding and your foam, and it kind of stops the cover from sticking to your foam inside, and your cover walking around the foam. Not just that, it gives it a much better finish. It is interesting how many people maybe perhaps don't know about that, or don't actually do it. It's essential. Foam, wadding, stockinette. Cut your border 25mm shorter to finish 25mm shorter than the depth of your foam. Cut your cover to the size that you want it to finish at, and then your foam 15mm bigger on the sides and the width. Sonaz, I would love to see a video demo of securing springs and webbing and how to do this, how to do the stitch ye upholsterers do. Well, I think I'll do a separate video for that, because that's quite involved, and for you to get the best information, I need to focus on that specifically. So we'll do that for you. SGT stumps. Hey, I'm building a version of the 𝔸𝕠𝕝𝕝𝕤 LC3 chair, and I'm now onto the cushions. Is there any trick to getting a template done to verify that I'm going to get the right, slightly oversized look that the L3C had? 𝔸𝕠𝕝𝕝𝕤 and the L3C chair, it's an iconic design for anybody who hasn't seen one before. Here's a photo. And what I would suggest to you, SGT stumps, is to cut, oversize your foams first and lay them all in to try and see and to make sure that you've cut them big enough. And again, depending on what density of foam you're using, if you go for a seating quality foam for your seat base and backs and arms, it's generally a lot softer. And with that, once your cover's on, they are going to look a lot more plump and nice, in the same way that the original Le Corbusier chairs do. Is there any trick to getting a template done to verify that I'm going to get the right size? There might be, but if I was doing it myself, patterns don't really exist when you're reupholstering something, or particularly if you're making something from scratch. So I would start with cutting my foams oversized, making sure that they fit where I want them to, and actually just cutting them down if you need to, or adding bits on if you need to. That's the beauty of foam, is you can take off an inch or add an inch here, there and everywhere, so it doesn't really matter. And then kind of work the cover from there. In the same way that I gave the advice to Queenie P58, make sure you wrap your foam in wadding and stockinette and oversize by about 15mm and cut your cover to the size that you want. This all depends on your fabric, of course. What a fantastic thing to do though, to make a version of that chair. Amazing. I hope that's answered your question. In essence, pop your foams in, cut them oversized and cut them down to fit the look of the Le Corbusier chair, and then cut your covers from there. Don't do the covers first. Peony photography. What's an inexpensive way to get into reupholstering furniture? I don't know. Inexpensive is a little bit subjective, but really the basic tools that you need are a hammer, a tack hammer, 7-ounce magnetic tack hammer, a pair of shears, a tack lifter. Some people like to use stripping chisels, which are to strip furniture out with, and tacks. Good pair of shears and tacks. You could just go for it. Strip furniture, and often if the furniture has been upholstered correctly, which is more often than not, then the way that you unpick it is you work an opposite to reupholster it. So that would be a good start. And then if you find you like it, you can start investing in some other tools. But to begin with, you just need a magnetic tack hammer, 7-ounce, tack lifter, ripping chisel if that's what you'd like. Oh, a mallet as well to use with your ripping chisel or tack lifter to get tacks and staples out, pair of shears, and of course some tacks so that you can attach your cover to your piece of furniture. If you've got a staple gun, then you want to make sure it's an upholstery staple gun, not a light duty staple gun. It wants to be a heavy duty staple gun. I hope that's helpful. Okay, Ganthony, upholstering corners for a beginner. Now, corners are a bit of a mystical art sometimes, depending on the depth of your cushion, the fabric that you're using, and the tools that you've got to hand and your experience. If it's a corner of a dining chair, so it'd be a box cushion corner, then it's all about the tension across and front to back. And if that tension is absolutely wonderful and fabulous, then it's going to make your corners a lot easier to fold in and do. If it's a corner, say on a nursing chair where it has a fixed cover, so not a cushion that comes off, but a cover that's actually fixed and it's curved. Sometimes the corners are quite curved. You could do like a tulip corner, pull tension across the bias and then pull the two sides to the middle, and then you end up with two folds that create your corner, and that's quite an easier corner. I hope that's helpful as well. Where can I get a lamp? This is from Light Rock. Where can I get a lamp like the one you have in the background? Thank you for noticing. We're actually in my consultation area at the workshop. This lovely lamp is actually going to be on my new website, which is launching next month, called House of Sonners, and you can purchase it from there. I will make sure I let you know when it's live. NB12905. I love your wonderful spirit. How can I learn to do more complex upholstery? I'm not sure where you are in the world, NB12905, but what you could do is seek out your local upholstery company and see if they will let you into their workshop, maybe in exchange for sweeping the floors and making some tea, and just watch them and see what they're doing. And just by having a go, really. I really admire people who sort of learn on the job and learn from seeing examples of previous work, and particularly in this day and age where this is a dying trade. There aren't many of us about, particularly compared to how many there once were. It is really difficult to get into the trade. It's not as easy as it used to be. So really, at this time, just have a go. Have a go, see if you can connect with some other people in your community that might be into the same thing. Or I tell you what, I'm actually in a few Facebook groups as well, upholstery Facebook groups, and it's really interesting the tips and tricks that I've picked up there. Knight James, what got you into interior design and upholstery? You clearly have such a strong connection with it. Thank you. That's another question I think that I can answer another time, because that is a long long story. So this is from Emily Foster Design. Top tip for getting into furniture restoration and upholstery. My top tip is have a go. Go for it. Please don't sell anything that you're not happy with, because it's a reflection on all of us, not just you. And practice, practice, practice. Unpick as much furniture as possible. Maybe get some upholstery colleagues to vet, not colleagues as such, but other upholsterers, whether it be Facebook groups or on Instagram, to vet your work before you either give it to a client or try and sell it, because we all want each other to produce really good work, because it's for all of us that it's good. It's not just for the individual. So that might be helpful. Judy 987678. How do you sew piping neatly round a cushion? I tried, but I don't get the stitching nearer. Judy, it's absolutely critical that we use a piping foot on our sewing machines when we're sewing piping. Also, and this I've only been doing maybe for the last 4 years, and I learnt it from one of my colleagues, I actually sew my piping underneath my top fabric. So my piping goes down first and then my top fabric goes on. And with reference to the answer for a previous question about how to get the sewing allowance on your piping correct, if it's absolutely correct and marries up with the sewing, is the same as the sewing allowance that you're using throughout your work, then you could just butt the edge of your top fabric and the edge of your piping together. It's going to be bang on. And then I put my piping foot on my sewing machine on top of that, and it gets it nice and close. My top tip for piping is that when you first sew your piping together and you're running it through your sewing machine, don't run your needle really tight to the piping cord. Keep it quite loose. So I kind of shift my piping over by a fraction on that first line. And then when I sew it to my piece of fabric, again, I'm just going a tiny bit in closer to my piping cord. I'm not going really tight up against my piping cord. Then when I sew my other side to my fabric and my piping, it's then that I go really tight up against my piping cord. And what that means is that when you turn your work the right way out, you cannot see any stitching anywhere from your previous layers. It is essentially, pardon the pun, seamless. How do you sew piping neatly around a cushion? Of course, the final thing to bear in mind with piping, especially if you're going around a cushion, is to cut your piping on the bias. So that is a 45-degree angle across your fabric. If you don't have quite enough fabric for the bias, then off straight. So it could be, so that's 45 degrees, isn't it? Sorry, that's 90 degrees and that's 40 degrees. So you could do maybe 30 degrees. As long as you've got it on an angle, then it will sit around your cushion a lot easier. Ian Robinson, 2341. How hard is it to cover a small seat with leather? It's for a motorbike. Now, motorbike seats are a bit of an art form of their own. If it's just a straight wraparound for like an old school motorbike seat, which I've done a few of, then it's very straightforward. And you just need to make sure that you're using a long enough staple, and depending on what you're stapling into. If it's something that's shaped, so a more modern motorbike seat, then you will have to have stitch lines in where there's peaks and troughs in the shape of the seat. So for old school motorbikes, pretty straightforward if it's just a wraparound. But for slightly newer school or more modern seats, then you will need some sewing lines somewhere. So this is the very last question from last week's Your Questions Answered. And it's from NB12905. How do you make colour choices? Do you ever use chalk paint for wooden pieces? We don't use chalk paint for wooden pieces, mainly because we polish and oil and stain our furniture. And for me, even if it wasn't a restoration job or a commission, I don't think I'd use a chalk paint. It's not really something that I'm into. I much prefer a kind of a proper painted finish, or if it's kind of a production piece, then it'd be a sprayed finished. There are people who absolutely adore chalk paint, so I have nothing against chalk paint. It's just not really my thing. How do you make colour choices? Depends on what you're making those choices for, NB12905. What's really important to remember, I feel, is that colour evokes emotion, and colours evoke feelings within a space. It can be very, very powerful. So for example, if you wanted to create a space that's much more relaxing and zen, then you want to stick with the neutral tones, soft palettes, monochromes, maybe greens as well, maybe, as you know, and but that could be by introducing plants, not necessarily wallpapers or furniture. If you wanted to create a bit more excitement and a bit more of a pizzazz, then you might want to choose slightly more acidic colours, yellows, oranges, maybe reds even. So it really does depend on the space and the feeling that you're trying to evoke when you go into that room. Now, if you're talking about colour pieces for furniture, then sort of a similar principle, but what I tend to say to clients is, how do you want to feel when you walk into a room and you see that piece of furniture that you've either had done, bought, or done yourself? Do you want to feel inspired? Do you want to feel sophisticated? Do you want to feel fun? And then you can choose your patterns and colours accordingly. Colour's really important in a space, and depending on how far into it, like colour therapy kind of thinking that you go into it, the more you know about kind of colour, the more kind of decisive you can be, I think. NB12905, I'm going to grab some of my paint colour swatches so that I can show you. So this is just about colour in paint that I'm talking about now, but if you're talking about colour with fabric, then the texture of the fabric and the sheen on the fabric is really also important, or the lack of sheen, for example, here. And it's actually there as well. Can you see that hanging from the wall? Now, this fabric is a linen viscose, but can you see it's got a bit of a silk look to it, but it won't be as difficult to work with, and it won't be as difficult to look after either. Now, this is a pastel, and the reason why I've chosen it to go on there is because I think this pastel pink is quite sophisticated, but also it's not in your face. I love pastel pink. I think it's actually a really mature colour. And for this space here, it goes really well against the blue. The sheen to this, the silk-like look to this, gives it an air of quality. And that's the same with linens as well. There is an air of quality, acidic, and this could be really, really punchy, even as a feature wall, or from the skirting up to the dado. Another acidic colour. This could be really fun, couldn't it? That could be in a hallway, could be even in a kitchen. Already chilled, much more muted, calmer colour. Maybe a drawing room or a living room. We don't all have drawing rooms, I know. A living room space, a bedroom, even a bathroom, if your bathroom's all about relaxing. I'm going to go for one of these colours as well, because I really love these tones. Now, 𝕤𝕤. This is a very, very soft green. This, for me, evokes calm. This evokes energy and excitement, and those are things to think about when you're choosing colour. But what would be lovely is actually if I put some colour schemes together for you as well. I can do that in another video. I hope that's helpful. Comment below if it was, or if it wasn't, or if there's any other things that you'd like to know and you'd like me to do for you, and Aaron and I will get filming. Thank you so much. Take a look at the other videos if you'd like. There is a video about soft furnishings and why would you have curtains made, but also another video that would be really, I feel really passionate about people seeing, is why would you have furniture made? And basically the difference between buying fast furniture or buying once and buying well. Enjoy your interiors. It is an extension of who you are. Do with it what you will, and who cares what anybody else thinks.